In the previous lesson, we added the JSON server package to our project. And in this lesson, I want to complete the setup process by creating a JSON file where we're going to store our endpoints as well as the mock data that this backend will return to us. And then we'll finish up the lesson by actually making a request to this backend in our browser so we can see what it returns back to us. So within our employee registry React project, at the very top level of the project, so right here, I'm going to create a new file called db.json. And db is just short for database, and that is just a common convention to call this file. This is a plain JSON file, which means we can write valid JSON syntax in here. Just as a quick reminder, within JSON, it's very similar to JavaScript objects. However, you do need to wrap the property names in double quotes. But don't worry, we're actually going to allow Prettier to format a lot of this JSON for us in just a second. So here's what I want to do. Let's go into the source directory and into our app.js component. And here, you'll remember we have an employee's slice of state that is set to an array of 5 objects. This is essentially what we want our backend to return. We can pretend that this is the shape of an employee object that is being stored in some database on the backend, running some server, written in some language. We don't care. We want this to be the data that is returned by an endpoint, an array of 5 employees. And let's make that endpoint employees. In other words, the user will go to /employees on our mock JSON server, our mock backend, to fetch this collection of code or this collection of records. So go ahead and copy, starting from the beginning of the employees property right here, all the way to the end of the array of employees right here. So I'm going to copy that. Then in our db.json file, I'm going to start with a pair of curly braces. This is our most outer level object, and this is what we need to provide to db.json. And then inside that object, you can paste the contents from app.js like so. And you can see when I paste, there's going to be a little bit of styling issues and technical errors because the syntax is not valid. But luckily, when I save this file, Prettier will automatically convert it to correct JSON syntax. It's very similar to regular JavaScript, but there are additional requirements. Like I mentioned earlier, we do need strings around all of our properties. So if we look at this file, I just want to explain what is going on here. The db.json file consists of an object with top-level keys or top-level properties. In this case, the only top-level key is employees, right? What this means is we now have an endpoint called /employees on our backend. So if I wanted another endpoint, like let's say /users, I'd add it like so, right? And then the value for that property name, for that endpoint, for that URL is what we want to return. So for example, if we go to /users, I can tell our JSON server to return an object or an array or a number or whatever we want. So the key here, or the property, is the URL. It's the endpoint, it's the route. And the value here is what to return when we hit that route. And this JSON server is simply going to run on our own computer, on localhost, but obviously with a different port compared to our React app. And as a reminder, our React app runs on port 3000 by default when we use Create React App. So at the end of the day, you should have a single employees property set to an array of 5 objects, and each object represents an employee. So what we're going to do in upcoming lessons is we're going to remove this state from our app.js component, and we're going to simulate making a request to our mock backend running on JSON server, which is going to respond with this data when we hit the /employees endpoint. And then I'm going to show you how to react to receiving that data in our app.js component. Okay, so whenever you need to modify what endpoints you're going to have and what they're going to return, all you need to do is come into this file and add an entry like so. So the next thing I want to do is open up our package.json file. So right here at the top of our project. And in the script section, I'm going to add a new script. As a reminder, all of the properties here represent commands that we can run from our terminal. So for example, we're able to run npm run start to create the React server and run our project. That's because start is available as a command here. So this property name is up to us. I'm going to create a new script called backend. And that means we're going to be able to run this script from our terminal by running npm run backend, right? So this name is whatever we want, but here we are simulating our backend, our mock server that is receiving our requests from the front end and returning data back. So I'm going to call it backend. And here we're going to write the command we want to run. So right here as a string, we're going to use our JSON server library, which we now have as a dependency in our project. And then I'm going to add the -- watch flag. That's going to say that JSON server should watch a given file for changes, and anytime that that file's content changes, it should restart the server. And what we're going to tell it to watch is the file we just created, which is db.json. So what we're going to tell JSON server is use this file as your basis for those endpoints, for those URLs, and the responses you provide for those respective endpoints, and then also watch the file to make sure that if it's saved, you can automatically restart and register those new changes that the user has made, such as new endpoints or modified return values. You can just watch that file and restart whenever the user makes changes. So it's super convenient. We're only going to need to run npm run backend once, and it's just going to be running in the background in the terminal tab, and it's going to be the server that's going to be watching this file and returning those responses whenever we hit the correct endpoint. The only other thing I want to add here is a -- port flag, and that is just specifying the localhost port, the port on your computer where we're going to be running this JSON server. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it doesn't conflict with the Create React App server, which is running on port 3000. So I'm just going to make this run arbitrarily on port 4000, just because it's an easy number to remember. So what this means, once again, is that we have an app running now when we run npm run backend on localhost port 4000. And if we were to navigate to localhost port 4000 and then do /employees, because this is the name of the endpoint, that endpoint would generate this response for us when we hit that API endpoint. So let me show you this in action. I'm going to go to my terminal, and I'm going to launch that JSON server. We gave the script the command backend. So here I'm going to execute npm run backend. So that is going to launch the JSON server. You can see it says hi, and then it says here are all the resources, which basically means here are all the endpoints that I realize you've given me. And you can see right here it's specified at employees is an endpoint that it recognizes. And if you add 10 different properties to that object in db.json, then you'll see 10 different URLs represented here. So now in our browser, I can go to localhost 4000 and then /employees, because that is the actual URL that we defined on that port. And now we're going to see a response that matches exactly what we specified in db.json. The only reason, by the way, that my JSON is formatted in my Chrome browser is because I am using an extension called JSON Vue, JSON VIEW, that you are welcome to install, but you should still see a response regardless. It just may not be formatted if your browser doesn't know how to deal with a JSON response. But the key takeaway here is we're running a server on our computer on port 4000, and we're hitting this employees endpoint in our browser, which means we're hitting that JSON server. It says, okay, I'm going to match /employees. Here's that array of 5 employee objects that you want me to give you. So when we're developing our React app in future lessons, you need to make sure that you are running this server in a separate terminal tab. We need our backend to be up successfully so that our front end can make requests to it, right? Because our React app can be functional and it can correctly make the request, but if our mock JSON server is not up and running, then that request to React will simply not go anywhere. It's not going to correctly hit this endpoint, right? So you need to make sure moving forward that you are running 2 processes in 2 separate terminal tabs. The first is going to be your JSON server, which you can start by running npm run backend, and then in a separate terminal tab, you need to make sure that you're also running the React server, which you can execute npm run start to start. And this is all the traditional Create React app context. So moving forward through this section, make sure that both of those pieces are running because they need to work together in order to make all the lessons up ahead make sense. All right, so now we have set up our JSON server and we confirmed that it is successfully working. I'm going to go ahead and start my React application. And then in the very next lesson, we'll talk about how we're actually going to make the request from our React application to our backend by using a library called Axios. So I'll see you there.